say, come along with me, let your spirit run free along the old black night. Good afternoon, listeners. Good afternoon. This is Tony Browder inviting you to come along with me and let your spirit run free in this edition of the Browder File Show. This is our 15th episode here on WPFW, and I am always pleased to be here and to share information with you, especially when I've been absent for a while. I've been finishing up my Black History Month speaking engagements out of town, been in on the West Coast for the last 10 days. And I tell you, leaving this area, leaving the DMV, makes me realize how truly precious this area is. We have treasures here that we don't even know of, that we don't even realize we have. And I don't realize it. It doesn't really hit me until I'm away from DC, which has been my home for the last 53 years. I'm not a native Washingtonian. I'm from Chicago, but I've lived here 2/3 of my life, and I come to know the DC community as my home. I was in Vegas a couple of weeks ago doing a presentation there, and as I was talking to the audience about things that I speak about quite frequently here in DC, quite frequently here on WPFW, I can't help but be amazed at how shocked people are who don't live in the area, who don't listen to WPFW, who don't have access to this information, how shocked they are to hear things that I've learned to take for granted. And it really reinforces in my mind how truly important this area of the country is, and that we have access to information that others in other parts of the country and other parts of the world don't even know exists. I also want to give a big shout out to Oscar Robinson and the folk in Vegas who sponsored Kemet in the Desert, where I spoke on the 21st and 22nd. And they surprised the heck out of me when I was given a proclamation on Saturday, February the 22nd, from the mayor of Vegas and the city council designating that day as Tony Browder Day in Vegas. So it's good to be honored for your work. And it's also good to come back home to drink from this source of knowledge that has inspired me and allowed me to do the things that I have been doing for so long. Before I jump into this show, I want to acknowledge a couple of members of our cultural community who have, as Brother Bay often said, outrun us to become ancestors. I want to wish a soulful goodbye to my homeboy, Jerry Butler, who passed away just recently, to my home sister, Roberta Flack, who also left us, and to Sister Angie Stone, who died tragically in an automobile accident as she was making her way from Alabama back to the Maryland area for a concert. And these passings of souls that are near and dear to us remind us that we never know when we would take our last breath. It serves as a reminder that we should not take the time that we have here on earth for granted, that every day is precious, every day counts towards the fulfillment of our cosmic assignment. And one of the things that I often do when I'm on the road is to look at the newspaper, particularly look at what's happening here in DC, look at the Washington Post, and just take note of what's happening in this city that I've called my home for the last 53 years. And there were a couple of posts that really stand out that will help frame the discussion that I'm going to have this afternoon with my special guest, who I'll introduce in a few minutes. On February 23rd, I noticed a headline in the paper that said, "Freed Proud Boys and J6ers take DC by storm," having a press conference in front of the U.S. Capitol where they shouted in unison, "Whose house? Our house." So not only did they storm the Capitol, but they're claiming that they have taken the Capitol back, and they have in so many words, that this is their house. They're claiming that DC is their town. And so we're witnessing the unchecked disuniting of America, if you will, disintegration of the American fabric as we knew it. And we're stepping into a brave new world that we have to begin to prepare ourselves for. On February 27th, I saw an article that grabbed my attention. It said that neo-Nazis targeted a majority Black town, and the locals in that Black town, Lincoln Heights, Ohio, launched an armed watch because they were not getting the protection from the local police force that they felt that they were due, the police protection that their tax dollars are paying for. So there was an incident where some neo-Nazis in a truck came into the vicinity of Lincoln Heights and took a threatening posture. So brothers and sisters, I assume, in that community armed themselves and stood guard at the entrance to their town to let folk know that we're not going to be intimidated. And again, it reminds me of this new era that we're living into now in the land of the free and the home of the cowards. But it reminds us that we have to be ever vigilant. And I'm also, I'm also taking note of this incident in Lincoln Heights, which is a suburb of Cincinnati, Ohio, because I'm going to be making my first appearance in Cincinnati this Friday. I'm going to be speaking at an event that my good friend, brother Jeff Menzies, is organizing Friday evening in Cleveland. So the world has turned. The world as we know it has taken a sharp turn to the right. And I have always been an advocate of us preparing ourselves for what is coming, what we see coming, but also more importantly, what we can't see coming that is on its way. And in yesterday's post, there was a headline to a story that says, Bowser signals DC will paint over the Black Lives Matter Plaza sign after the GOP threatens the funding of DC. So I've always said, those who know me know that I've said repeatedly that Black lives only matter when white folks say they. If they don't think our lives are important, they will erase those things that have added value to our lives, DEI and so many other laws that were set in motion in order to level the playing field. They can erase those laws anytime that they want to, and we're witnessing the erasure of laws that were written to guarantee our ability to thrive in this country. We're witnessing the erasure of our history and our culture and our contributions to American society. So in the presence of all of these things that are moving us back into a time when white men were secure in their positions to control the lives of white women, control the lives of so-called minorities, and flex their muscle as they positioned themselves as the most powerful nation in human history, we're witnessing a changing of the guard, a changing of the world as we know it. And so I feel, honored this afternoon to bring on a guest who I know can help us make some sense out of the nonsense, the insanity that we're witnessing right now. My guest today is Niyana Rasayon, who is an associate professor and behavioral neuroscientist. He's a brother who is skilled in this knowledge of the mind, the human mind, and the African mind. He has degrees from Fisk University and Meharry College. He has a PhD in psychobiology and neuropsychology from Howard University. He's an adjunct professor here locally and has done tremendous work. He's written numerous papers, he's written numerous publications, and we're going to get into a discussion of his work as I invite my brother Niyana to come forward. And I extend greetings to you and thank you for being a guest on my program today, brother. How are you?
Hotep, Baba. I'm absolutely honored that you allow me to come in and share my perspective on some of the things that are happening on this planet. It's a privilege to be with this brother because you guys may not know Tony back in the day in the early 80s produced a program called Journey to Enlightenment, which was all about elevating the consciousness of melanin dominant people throughout the planet. So it is my pleasure to be here. I'm honored to be here, my brother.
Well, brother, since you opened that door, you were a producer of that program. And more importantly than that, we were participants in the very first study group that I was ever involved in, and that was the late 70s. And the leader of our group was WPFW's own brother Kalanje, Vince Godwin. So we've known each other for over 40 some odd years. And I'm pleased to see that you have continued to impressed me with your scholarship, with your scholastic acumen and mastery of of knowledge of the human mind, who we are as melanated people, and what all of that means. So you've done a lot of work, brother, and I want to, I've read over your bio, and there's a couple of things in there that I would like for you to unpack as we begin our dialogue this afternoon. You have an understanding of neuroplasticity, and you also reference in your bio work that you've done regarding micronutrients and the role that they play in our development. So I would like to ask you, first of all, two-part question. First of all, describe neuroplasticity, what it is and how it impacts us, and the role of micronutrients and the role that they play in the development of infants, teens, and adults.
Wow, my brother, that's a nice slice out of this pie, but I will be glad to share with you. In a nutshell, the term neuroplasticity doesn't mean anything other than the ability of your central nervous system, in particular your cortex, your brain, your neural network, to modify itself and develop depending upon whatever life experiences you go through. It does it automatically, whatever your experiences are. It's two domains. One can be perceived as positive, the other can be perceived as negative. Negative would be, let's say, if you're getting high all the time, smoking buku ganja, eating drunk food, artificial sweeteners, locked down in front of the television, sitting down all the time, your brain is not going to grow. It's going to sort of stagnate and repeat the things that you thought you'd already learned. The positive element would be like sprouting, like growing new paths, neural sophisticated highways, if you will. Like you may have a 2-lane highway, neuroplasticity positive could turn into a 12-lane highway clover leaf with specific directions to tell you how to get around it. Micronutrients are intimately tied to that because what you eat, what you listen to, and the air you breathe, the company you keep, will fine tune those neural networks so that they can function optimally. And the inverse of that would be if you and I are familiar with roller skating on asphalt or smooth concrete, that would be neuroplasticity at its peak. Conversely, if it's weathered with potholes and dents and all kinds of cracks in the asphalt, that would be an example of negative neuroplasticity. And so the micronutrients would be the food, the music you listen to, the company you keep, the tonal qualities of your voice, because your first instrument is your voice, and it's ironically the most sacred instrument on the planet. So neuroplasticity literally involves that. And of course, micronutrients will simply mean the foods that you're putting in your body, how they give rise to proteins based upon what you're actually eating.
Mhm. If I understand what you're saying, brother, then we are not only what we eat, we are also what we think, we are also what we listen to, we are also what we see, what we look at. So everything that we internalize into this body affects us on a cellular level. Did I get that right?
Absolutely. You got it. Absolutely. That's it in a nutshell. As a matter of fact, our vanilla brothers and sisters have toyed with a term to explain that, and it's called psychoneuroimmunology, which means your body can literally evolve or devolve based upon what kind of experiences you're going through and whatever you're thinking and whatever you're believing. Oncologists today, people that are locked down into cancer research, they have chosen to incorporate something that they call mindfulness, which the ancient Egyptians were doing all along. It's like you think positive thoughts, you think positive things. And it's just like because we did it way back in the day when we connected. Black people call it vibing. You pick up vibes from people, and those vibes will resonate with your chakras, and then you can grow in those interactions. Conversely, you can pick up vibes from people and you're told like you don't need to be around those people. And all those things can impact your neuronal network, your immune system, and as a result, they can determine your not ability, but your vulnerability to either develop a disease or disordered state and or become ill or have malaise or just not have a positive frame of outlook on life.
Mhm. I've also seen in your bio where you've done some work regarding what you refer to as learned help. Um, can you talk about this behavior and how it shows up within the African American community? And I cite this because I've been around several people recently who talk about trauma, the trauma they experienced in their youth, and they keep bringing that subject matter up. They keep holding on to this trauma. And my thinking is, as long as you keep talking about it, it will keep reasserting itself in your life. So, as part of this mindfulness explanation that you gave us, as long as your mind is full of trauma, that's what you will continue to track to yourself. Am I off base with this, or is there another way to
No,
deal with some of these issues?
you are 100% on point. The challenge is if people know how to cathart, and you might say dump that, it would be like exhaust coming from a vehicle that's not clean. You've seen some of the buses in the city, in certain parts of the city, the plume, smoke coming from the bus, it's like dark. You can tell they need to change the oil, and a bunch of other things going on. So they do need to let it out. But if they do not know how to selectively release it, they're recycling it through their body. And as they recycle it through their body, they're feeding pathways of negativity. And it would be almost like you walking out of your flat onto green grass, but you walk out the same way every day. So you're going to create a path, a carve through that grass. So you're going to screw up the grass that would ordinarily grow there. And as you do that, you may find yourself inclined to walk that path over and over again, then ask stupid questions like, why isn't the grass growing? Because you're not paying attention to how you're navigating your life. The exact same phenomena happens inside of the body, and it's very difficult to override because when you chose to allude to learned helplessness, you know, I don't like bringing it up, but it's a very critical part of how melanin dominant humans navigate their lives. They'll do things like you just alluded to, and they'll say, hey, I'm taking one day at a time. It's in God's hands. I'm just here, which means they do not have a plan of how to navigate their lives, and they don't have an understanding of the meaning of Emmanuel, the God, the goddess is within you. So they allow things external of them to take control of their lives, and that literally feeds them into what we call learned helplessness.
Hmm. So another term for learned helplessness is victimhood, right? And
Yeah.
there are some folk in this society who accuse people of African ancestry of playing the victim card, of playing the race card. So I would assume is a distinction that can be made between victimhood and people who are actually victims of crimes that are being committed against them. How do we discern one from the other? How do we differentiate what's really happening to us?
That's an excellent question. Typically, people that are operating out of their victimhood, they unfortunately have a tendency to be a little narcissistic. It's all about them. It's like what happened to them, or why they have so many challenges and obstacles in their lives, as opposed to recognizing that they have a degree of autonomy, they have some power to make decisions. And they will say, I'm just not able to do this. I'm just not able to do that. Life is so hard. If you are a melanin dominant human, and I use that term interchangeably to talk about black people and dark brown people, you are living in an environment that's a mad Babylon. Literally, you're like walking around in purgatory every day, and you are trying to ignore the fact that you're in purgatory. And so you're constantly making excuses about being in purgatory rather than saying, this is where we are, and this is how I need to navigate that. I need to pay attention to what I'm putting into my body. I need to pay attention to the company I keep. I even need to pay attention to the kind of clothing that I wear. And I definitely need to pay attention to what I allow to come out of my mouth. Because what you verbalize out of your mouth, you've just created a communication loop in your brain to express what's turning over in your brain. And as you express what's turning over in your brain, it goes back into what we talked about a moment ago when we talked about neuroplasticity. So you continually to allow yourself to be a victim of your own thinking, unbeknownst to you that a lot of your thinking isn't really thinking anyway. You're just recycling someone else's thoughts and embracing them like they're your own.
So that's sometimes referred to as miseducation, allowing someone else to determine our thoughts. How do we re-educate ourselves? How do we do? Is there a way to do this on a mass scale, or do we have to begin a process of re-education, re-indoctrination based on working in small groups? What do you see as a social scientist, as someone who understands the mind and human behavior? What are some of the ways that melanin dominated people can begin the process of reclaiming mastery of their thoughts and mastery of their domain?
We have to start literally pausing just long enough to make a decision rather than tuning in to group think. I'm sure you probably recall if you saw the movie, probably the first one with Will Smith's character in it, and Men in Black and Kane talking to Will Smith when they discovered quote unquote aliens on the planet. And Will was basically saying in a nutshell, hey, like Cain, we can go out, we can tell the people, we can take care of business, we can do blah, blah, blah. And Cain said, like, slow your roll. You're not able to do that. And Will is like, why not? These people are like smart. He said, hold up. The person is smart, people are dumb. And people are collectively dumb because today we don't even know that a lot of what's happening with the current administration is being fed to us through algorithms and through the mainstream media and what's on social networks. So we repeat what's in front of us. And as a result of that repetition, we carve pathways in our brain that lead us down the path of ignorance with the belief beyond what we can actually control. In time, things will change. Maybe these people will get their act together. And when they get their act together, we can do this. Kwame Ture pointed out a long time ago, you cannot do anything with organizations and institutions. The Honorable Mosiah Marcus Garvey also pointed out that you had to work as a group. And when you alluded to some of the things that you pointed out a little while ago in your presentation, your opening, I'm a little perplexed in terms of why the Congressional Black Caucus, why the Urban League, the Black Bar Association, Association of Black Social Workers, Association of Black Psychologists have not taken out a complete page in the major newspapers to point out the pathology that we have basically chosen to accept in this country as a result of the new administration. And so, you and I are warriors from the day when we would be on the street handling our business. But some of these people have become so intellectual that they think they actually have time to do a study. We are in a full-scale war, and a great deal of it is being fought in cyberspace.
So, brother, one of your other areas of study that is of interest to me is the study of institutional racism. So, what role does institutional racism play in the development? What role has it played in the development of this country, and what role does it play right now in politics, in policing, in policy? How do we get where we are, and what is it that we can do if we aren't reliant on the Black Caucus or other organizations that supposedly represent our interests? What can the average person do to address some of the problems that we have been born into as a result of being citizens here in the United States?
One of the things that we need to do is we need to recognize that this quote unquote training that we have undergone and still are going through, the internet literally is a Nazis web. You cannot trust things that you find on the internet unless you have enough sophistication to cross-reference whatever you see at least 5 times. Because the search engines oftentimes will give you information that are tied to the algorithms to say release that information. And I don't need to tell you about, if you ever heard of the Black Hat Club, and some of them, they meet in Vegas, as a matter of fact, every year. They are the world renowned hackers. And as a matter of fact, the current administration recruited the guy that's working with Tesla's technology in these electric cars. He recruited some individuals from the Black Hat Club or hackers from all over the world to work for him. And because they're probably somewhere between the age of 19 and 23, they don't have any insight in terms of what these things are actually doing. They are looking at zeros and ones and writing code. And so what people can do of color is you need to pay attention to what you are eating, number one. You need to pay attention to the company that you keep. You need to learn how to differentiate between music and noise. And you, as best you can, you need to avoid being around people that are toxic. You can intuitively tell when you're around toxic people. You will get a kind of low-grade malaise to kind of creep up on you when you're in their presence. It's intuitively you will know, like, I'm just getting a vibe like I'm not feeling this. And that's your higher self telling you that you need to create some distance between you and that person. The other thing that we need to do, because you referenced the people that have crossed over, we have forgotten how to talk to our ancestors. We have literally forgotten how to talk to our ancestors. And part of our dialogue will be and will unfold to be to talk about how we've been led down this loop of ignorance when we think about from the womb to the tomb. You always have a hotline to your ancestors. But if you don't know their names and don't know how to communicate with them, They will just be in the loop of your life, and they may not show up until you have a real crisis. And that's probably to save you so that you will have time to try to remember them. So we need to learn how to reconnect with our ancestors. And Brother Hiawatha, he has a pretty comprehensive book out that talks about our spirituality. And I
That's
mentioned that.
Brother Kaba Kameni.
Absolutely, Brother Kaba. All right. He has a book that talks about our spirituality. And Black people have gotten confused associating religion with spirituality. And religion has very, very, very little to do with spirituality. So when you lose your sense of identity, you're basically what I call a spook on asphalt, walking profile and dead. You don't know any better. You believe everything that the white media and white folk have said.
So you're a brother who has been grounded in African history, African culture, African spiritual traditions, and yet you've been able to make a name for yourself within academia, within a scientific profession that does not abide by some of the concepts and ideas that have anchored your life. How do you deal with this dichotomy, brother? How do you keep it together as you do this work that you've been chosen to do?
You know what's really interesting, brother, which is a real challenge. And I appreciate you not formally naming the institution where I'm an associate professor. The reality is, I get invited to do a lot of things internationally. And I won't lie, oftentimes I don't have the time to go. And you know me, we know each other. We don't just go because we got invited, we go packing. We go ready to deliver content. And it was in 2023, because I was 24, I was in Bangkok. I was talking about brain trauma and undiagnosed brain trauma in women. But what we're talking about, I was in Dubai and I did a presentation that was literally tied to us looking at introducing neuroscience and artificial intelligence to something that I refer to as the Meet Joe Black pre-death awareness phenomena. And I said that to you, asked me how do I cope? I have to go outside the United States a lot because a lot of times people in academia have been well trained. And just because you have a PhD and a bunch of publications doesn't mean you know anything about your identity. Because you know one of the most recognized scholarships in this country is the Rhodes Scholar, all right? And my best friend graduated from West Point. He went in 71. I went to North Carolina A&T in 70. I said that to you to say, when you get trained, you lose your sense of identity. And when you're trained, you don't understand the little clause that they use at the end of a research project. Further studies are needed. Further studies are needed. This society is built upon thievery, deception, exploitation, and genocide. We cannot ignore that. But some of us will say we need to do a study on it. No, I'm saying you need to introduce an action plan and demand some accountability. And as you demand accountability, folk will say to you that you're a little bit outside the box. My middle name means I'm outside of the box. Coco means finding harmony, like finding harmony in dark places. It's KOKO. So how do I deal with it? I stay away from people that are not conscious. And when I'm around people that pretend to be conscious, I know how, like you see me in a hat. If you ever see me and I don't have a hat on, that means I'm sitting in my flat, my home somewhere just chilling. I wear hats because I realize, symbolic reminder to myself, that a lot of the people that I meet in academia, they are not able to hear what's inside of my head. And so my hats mean, hey, I'm not inviting you inside of my head. Because if I invite you inside of my head, it's like getting under the hood of a high-end car and you're only accustomed to driving an old school Volkswagen. You feel me? And
I
you're going to
understand.
ask me to explain everything to you. Why should I talk to someone about things that are esoteric and they're still trying to figure out whether or not one plus one can actually become 11 and it can become infinity rather than being two. So you don't take them through that loop because fools have conversations that become foolish when you try to engage in-depth information with people that do not have the capacity to process what you're sharing. So you don't judge them, you just stay away from them.
And that really speaks to the times that we're in now because there are so many people who have no idea what's going on. And it's very difficult not to be judgmental, but the reality is we only know what we know. And if you don't take a concerted interest in wanting to learn information beyond what you were taught in elementary school or high school or even college, or read sources other than the Washington Post or CNN or MSNBC, then your understanding of this world will be severely handicapped. So I do feel you, brother. Not everyone is capable of looking outside of the box. And one of the things that I've been talking about recently is that once you stick your head up outside the box, you realize that there is no box, right? We create our own reality. Look, let me just tell our listeners that you're listening to the Browder File Show. We're here on WPFW. I want to thank everyone who contributed to our recent fundraiser and made it possible for me to be here, providing you with additional information, introducing you to guests like my guest today, Niyana Rasayon, who's a scientist of the mind. And he's one of the rare individuals that I know who has the academic training to discuss melanin, something that so many people are jumping on the melanin bandwagon who don't even know how to spell the word, but they profess themselves to be experts of something that they don't understand. Can you spend a few minutes enlightening our audience with why melanin is important? And you several times during the course of this discussion have referenced melanin dominated people. Why is this important? Why does it matter? And what can we begin to do to acquaint ourselves to an aspect of the human experience that has intentionally been kept away from the average person?
Okay, first we're gonna juxtapose it upon chlorophyll. All of us are familiar with plants, and the plants have this little green, dark green stuff in them, chlorophyll. Plants don't do anything without chlorophyll. All right? The human body would not even manifest and become an incarnate life form if it were not for melanin. Even in the very foundation of development of the nervous system, you're talking about melanin basically creating something called a marula, which is like a dark raspberry, if you will, or a cluster berry. And it's basically creating a network for you to actually have an embryo to evolve into a fetus. That's melanin foundation. Now, to simplify melanin, let me give you my definition for a human, because I have slides. I can make them available to you at some point in the immediate future. But a human is a hydrocolloidal, pseudo autonomous, sentient carbon-based photobioelectromagnetic transducer, aerobic type life form, eumelanin or pheomelanin dominant. What that means is the eumelanin and the pheomelanin is for your vanilla brothers and sisters. The eumelanin is the dark melanin. But within the human, there is neuromelanin. And in the back of your eye, your retina, is basically a sophisticated bed of melanin. Melanin not only is something that has the ability to hold and reverberate life force and energy, it is literally necessary for you to unfold and have life, because it absorbs the energy, then it reverberates the energy. Then it can transduce the energy, which means that you're not able to see if you didn't have melanin in the back of your eye. And your brain won't process the information at all if you don't have neuromelanin. So it's a major transduction system throughout your body. Think of it as being like the Metro Center, the Red Line hosts, where everything has to be processed to connect. It also can absorb energy, not lose energy, re-radiate energy, capture and hold energy. Melanin is the foundation of something that we call coltan, which we use in smart cars, smart technology, smart dashboards. It is the foundation of that. It's a lot more than the quote unquote melanin that you see in your skin. Neuromelanin is throughout your body. As a matter of fact, my vanilla brothers and sisters will never admit to you, but my colleague, Dr. Timothy Moore, and the brother that you know, Baba, I was about to tell you about Baba Asa Hilliard. I'm going to tell you about him later, and Baba Rashida. But Brother Richard King and Dr. Francis Quest Wilson, they were talking about melanin 4 decades ago. All
Long
right.
before it was fashion.
You follow me? And so, but ironically, it wasn't in fashion, but it was a troubled term. Troubled term meant that it got people in trouble. Because when you start talking about melanin, you were really turning over trouble. Anything that you think that you could have done with uranium, or anything that you could have done with iridium, or anything that you could have done with isolated parts of coltan being molded into your cell phone or your smart dashboard on your airplane or your jet, guess where the navigator is for all the melanin in the human body? The navigator, the conduit to make sense out of it, is the relationship of sunlight energy to your pineal gland. Your pineal gland is like the maestro of what happens with melanin in the rest of your body. It even tells the hypothalamus and pituitary gland what to do, hence the circadian rhythm. So melanin is the foundation of all human life. And at this very moment, our vanilla brothers and sisters are working on synthetic melanins to try to figure out how to create melanin in a laboratory. They've even gone so far as to try to create synthetic uteri. And some of the things that you see going on in your country right now with those minions working for the guy that gave you the illusion of Tesla technology for the electric cars. I'm deliberately not calling his name.
Mm-hmm.
This brother was born in Pretoria, South Africa. His father was doing his thing at the height of apartheid in South Africa. So they're all from that particular den of jinn and negative spirits on the planet. And they are very much aware of it. So Americans are so wrapped up into the power of material things, money, that they've actually allowed him to go into your home's household, unbeknownst to you, via digital networks and your IP addresses, tapping into everything that you need to create another neural net that will be governed by algorithms that we're not even ready for. He's even working on something called the Neuralink, which is designed to create something as small as a rice kernel and probably about a tenth the size of a dime to make available inside of your head to keep you always online. That's being done now on something called Neuralink. And his colleague slash that you don't hear about, Gates, is working on how to use bugs to get protein from them to feed them to different people in continental Africa to see what they are doing. So how do we navigate this? Like I said, Kwame Ture, all right? The Honorable Marcus Garvey. If we don't work as a team or a group, the stumbling in America, because she's stumbling now, she's completely off balance. It's inevitable for her to fall. And the irony of it is it would be melanin dominant people to keep her from falling. But she's stumbling. So we don't need to get caught up with what's happening in Ukraine. I know they call it the Ukraine, but they pronounce stuff wrong so frequently that we just go along with the programs. Like Turkey is Turkey. So we got a lot of work to do. And I would suggest that we learn how to use our oracles. Ife, Iking, Tarot, even talk to the kahunas. Talk to your great grandparents. Sit down, be quiet, and listen.
Brother, this is a perfect segue to a discussion about your forthcoming book. You've got a book coming out called Ancient Perspectives in Crossing Over. And I can only imagine that this book is an outgrowth of some of the research that you've done on pre-Eurocentric views on death. Can you unpack this subject matter for us and share with the audience why this topic should be of greater importance to us and what we can begin to do now to acquaint ourselves with the power associated with ancestral ecology?
A lot of people, they know you as the international cometologist, Egyptologist on the planet. But I don't think a lot of people are aware of how spiritually tuned in you are. I'm sure you remember when we used to talk a little bit with Jabibu about his wild thoughts back in the day, right? And we used to talk to Brother Bey about his thing. We talked to all of these brothers and sisters way back in the day. And Kalanje was an anchor because a lot of people were observing your knowledge about Egyptology from the point of view of the structures in Egypt and the pyramid and the digs that you're sponsored for Baba Asa. But very few of them were able to tune into the spiritual core of your essence. So when you made the reference about the book that I'm working on, I actually started on it before my daughter crossed over. And that's because I unfortunately was utilizing, and that was 12 years ago. And now it's about 70% written. And as you know, you came to my son's service crossed over. And I was tripping and pissed because I didn't get a chance to explain the geometry of that particular structure. And then you and I had a little sidebar and you reminded me of all the things that you saw. So I mentioned that about you is because you've always been spiritually tuned in, like you were tuned in to Sister Frances Cress Welsing, you were tuned in to Baba Asa Hilliard, and I know in your memory that Brother Rashida and Baba Asa, they both crossed over while they were in Kemet or Egypt. You tuned into all that energy. You even tuned in to Dr. Frances Cress Welsing when she was crossing over. And so the book that is unfolding now is literally taking us beyond the myth that I alluded to earlier, from the womb to the tomb. This is what we always hear when we hear something about ancient civilizations, and they'll say from the womb to the tomb. So the foundation of the book is literally starting off pointing people out to the first law of thermodynamics, pure science. Energy cannot be created or destroyed. It only changes form, period. So when we think someone has actually, quote unquote, crossed over, and you remember the scene with T'Challa talking to the ancestors in Black Panther, he had gone over to visit them, but they gave him something to stimulate his pineal gland. And I'll briefly, momentarily expand a little bit about the pineal gland. It's like a sophisticated 10th generation Bluetooth, like you have in your phone. You also remember in Mulan, when Eddie Murphy's character, the little dragon, was talking to the ancestors of Mulan and they were arguing. I mentioned that to you to say, when you don't know who you are, you cannot go into the abyss broad stadium of Duat and say you want to talk to your ancestors because you don't know their names. And if you don't know their names, this is like walking into a grand stadium and you're just saying, hey, blah, 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 and you didn't call anybody's name. Your ancestors may not be able to discern who you're talking to. And because they are spirits, they have a level of respect that we could not phantom in the incarnate realm. Because if energy cannot be created or destroyed, it only changes forms. That means there is a flux of abyss of energy. So this book is about how we have been misled with everything we've been told about people crossing over, from the Tibetan book of the Great Awakening to the Egyptian book of the Great Awakening, and to the classic Bharat Tadal, which is another version of the Tibetan book of the Great Awakening, and to the holy tablets, and to the Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita. All these things talk about how you commune with your ancestors. But we have been so misled that we literally think what vanilla people have told us. You trying to communicate with the dead. The average person would think about a Ouija board, a Houdini saying, if there's something there, I'll come back and tell you. But this energy communicates with you on a higher frequency. And I'm actually tapping into that by finding the literature that's intimately tied to the pineal gland and other compounds in the pineal gland that they don't usually talk about because they restrict themselves to talking about melatonin. But there are compounds in the pineal gland so phenomenal and so sophisticated that they dump inside of your body when you have a traumatic crossing over. And if you are not eased into crossing over during that 40-day period, you may create what we call a phantom, a level of energy that Europeans will tell you is a ghost. Like you saw Ghost with Whoopi Goldberg in it. You follow me? And I told you earlier about Black Panther. You also saw, if you saw Meet Joe Black, you saw death coming to talk to the guy that was about to cross over. And there was another classic movie called Afterlife, all right? When Neeson's character is talking to this young lady that has crossed over, she doesn't know she's crossed over. And the same thing in A Wonderful Life, but the person hasn't crossed over, but the person is seeing what would happen had he crossed over, because the angels came to see him in Wonderful Life around Christmas time to let him know this is what the world would be like if you're not here. And so African people are continually bombarded with ignorance to keep us from thinking about our spirituality. Rather, we find ourselves, well, you know, if you get yourself the Bible and you believe in God and you believe in this and that and you get to heaven, you can join in the resurrection. But I'm telling you, African people that are conscious, they knew the energy doesn't have to be resurrected because the energy simply changes form. It's always here. I guarantee you, I know you know, Tony, because you're from Chicago. There are a lot of people of color that set a place at the table around holy day seasons for a relative. They do a libation. They may go burn a special tobacco for a particular one, put out their special liquor. There are people that know folks that have crossed over and they'll say, I can smell grandmama's perfume. Or I can smell granddad's cherry tobacco. And the person has crossed over a decade ago. So how did that get in your house? And that's what I'm actually researching.
Yeah, yeah. You know, another film that deals with this subject matter that I thought introduced the concept rather well was M. Night Shyamalan's first film, The Sixth Sense. Story
Oh,
about this
yes.
little boy who saw dead people, right? And he
Hmm.
led the whole audience on this path that we thought the boy was just talking to folk, and we didn't know that they were dead. You
Hmm.
realize how much that concept is a part of indigenous culture. So,
Hmm.
you know, I would like to think, brother, that your forthcoming publication is bringing people to a greater sense of awareness that there is no death. There's just various phases, various levels of beingness, and
Hmm.
that those who supposedly have died are still with us. It's simply a
Hmm.
matter of developing the capacity to hear them, to see them, to sense them, to communicate with them so that we can access the information that they have to impart to us. I mean, that's where I would like to think that all of this is headed with the current inhabitants of the Nazi house setting America up for the Great Fall. When it falls, as you said, I think melanin-dominated people will be the ones who will set it back up, and it's our connection with the unknown, the unseen, the ancestors is going to be one of the tools that we will use to put ourselves back on the path and to finally get it right this time. Am I off base or am I just hypothesizing or is this wishful
No, you're
thinking or what?
100% on point, Tony. You're 100% on point. And see, the challenge is, I don't have time to explain to you about Hollywood relating to a special kind of wood with the holly that they use to
Yeah.
create stories in Hollywood and why the lion represented the constellation of Leo and how they're basically guiding us, right? A lot of movies are for people that don't have time to read books or don't read books. So you just pointed out in a nutshell what we all know. But just think about how much power that would rekindle in people if they use the word that you know very well, remember, if they put back together those things that allow them to align with the ancestors. And our vanilla brothers and sisters are afraid of it. They are just petrified with fear of what will happen when we become conscious of what's here. And let me remind you of this. This is the epitome of the pathology of vanilla brothers and sisters system of racism and white supremacy. This epitomizes it. Probably about 65% of the generation of congressmen and senators that are on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., 65% to 70 in their bloodline. I guarantee you, somewhere in their family tree, they had a wet nurse suckling one of those vanilla babies. All right? And that is the most intimate thing that a woman can do with a child, is to allow that child to eat of her body that which has come through her body. And these pathologically disturbed vanilla people that would literally think that they can do what they want to do with melanin dominant people, they are going to be in for a surprise that will blow their mind. If we had a presentation to talk about all the inventions done by melanin dominant people and we took them all away from the planet, your vanilla brothers and sisters would still be in the Caucasus Mountains. Because the brother's light bulb would not have lit if it wasn't for Louis Latimer. You follow me? And we wouldn't even be able to talk online right now if it wasn't for that sister that was born in 1955. I'm trying to retrieve her name. The sister that was born in 1955 is the reason why we're able to talk on Zoom, the reason why we have WebEx. Her name is Marion Kroc, right? C-R-O-K, C-R-O-A-K. She developed this technology. It was a sister. And if Yahoo knew that the pacer in his heart, his chest, was developed by a brother, he probably tried to pull it out. So this planet is able to move on its axis literally because of melanin dominant people. And vanilla people wouldn't even have the word Renaissance in their vocabulary if they had not been allowed to go back to Africa to study. Mm-hmm. Prior to then, they were running around trying to handle the plague. And I could tell you stories about the plague, but we don't have time for that. Mm-hmm. But the bottom line is, we are the saviors of this planet. We are the sentinels of this planet. And here's that question that all pro-Black people always ask. Hey, if we're so smart, how do they get in control? By nature, we are a divine people. And the irony of it is, when we do engage in battle, we have a tendency to be like wolves. Wolves will yield and give the life opportunity for the wolf that they have defeated. But what we did not realize is we are dealing with demons. I'm telling you, dealing with demons. You are dealing with energy that is so disconnected from nature that you actually have werewolves and vampires are now running your country. And they are telling you, anytime somebody can say to you concretely, I'll make this statement very quickly. Somebody can come to you and say, we need to delete this and delete that. That is not the language you use when you're talking about humans. That's the language you use when you're talking about data points and objects. But like I told you, this brother was born in Pretoria. He was born in the heart, in the womb of apartheid.
So let me just ask you a personal question for the benefit of sisters and brothers in the community who I know and love. Given the history of our oppression, given the current oppression that is happening, give me two or three things that we can do right now to minimize the damage that we know is coming and to insulate ourselves such that we'll have some time to pivot and to do what to open ourselves up for ancestral guidance. What suggestions can you provide those who are open?
Your audio is dropping. We need to make sure our physical bodies are clean. That doesn't mean just getting in the shower or getting in the tub. Our physical bodies have to be clean, because if our physical bodies are not clean, we're not going to be able to recognize that I am you and you are me. Because some of us are looking at other folk that had government jobs and say, wow, just 2 years ago, you had a Benz and two Lexus cars, and now you're in a funny situation. We are our brothers and sisters keepers, number one. We are family. There are no international games won that we really recognize, like soccer and football and basketball, when you don't see them approach from a team. So we need to understand that we're on the same team. Literally, we may have different zip codes, but we're on the same team. And when you add to that, we need to always demonstrate respect to our siblings. Like, you don't hear me talking about these Caucasians as other than calling them vanilla brothers and sisters, because I know they are a hybrid derivation of humans. So I'm not able to use the polarizing language. So we need to recognize that we will not survive this madness if we don't recognize that we're on the same team. So we need to embrace each other collectively and start speaking to each other like Dr. Francis Cress Welsing would say. We need to recognize that I am you and you are me, literally, and own up to the fact that I am my brother's and my sister's keeper. And we need to look in our refrigerators, and any foods that we see in our refrigerators that we know are not natural and nectar foods that are good for us, we can either give them away or slowly take them in moderation and make them disappear, and don't buy that crap anymore. So you got to stop eating the quote unquote white man's food. And if you don't know what that means, white rice, white sugar, white flour, aspartame, some of these pops that come over the counter, that's where the micronutrients come in. You feel me? Something else that we can do, trust. We need to stop wearing clothing that's not made from cotton, linen, silk, or rayon, because your chakras cannot talk to each other if you drop down in Dacron and polyester clothing. So those things you have control over. The last thing you need to do is you need to hydrate. When your body is acidic, you are definitely going to be in the twilight zone of ignorance. That means you need to hydrate. You need to put decent water in your body on a regular basis, and you need to keep your vessel clean. And stop thinking that the resurrection or Lent, the Great Spirit is going to come down and save you. All right? You need to get that crap out of your head. You need to learn how to reconnect with your ancestors by asking your elders, can you tell me something about granddad? Or can you tell me something about grandma? And then they'll say, you know what? That little boy you have, he acts just like your granddaddy did. I don't know who taught him how to play the piano. That's because the spirit of your granddad is hanging around that kid, creating a neural network inside of that kid. And they know if they show up to you, you're going to be scared of them, because the church got you thinking that when spirits show up, they're either evil because they're supposed to be dead.
Brother, listen, you've got a lot of information to share. You've got some publications. Where can people get in contact with you? Let us have a website. Let us have the titles of a couple of your publications and the themes associated with them before we wrap up.
Okay, I have a website called the Eyes of Ma'at. That's EYESOFMAAT.com. EYESOFMAAT.com. Eyes of Ma'at. That's where I keep my publications available to the public. There was a time when I was plugging some things into Amazon, but Amazon, they'll take your stuff, and you might get 25% of your stuff, but the point being, that's where people can find my stuff. And I selectively make material available to people because, Tony, you know better than I do. What was his name? John Lewis talked about Good Trouble, the brother that was on the Pettus Bridge. When
Yeah.
you're in academia, brother, you're on your own, because there's so many of us so well trained. We don't watch each other's back. We compete against each other, and we compete against each other with thinking that we need to outdo each other rather than realize we're on the same team. So eyesofmaat.com. You can go to my website. You'll find what my person does on a regular basis. And I do a number of presentations, which includes detailed PowerPoint presentations, so people can see some of the things that we're talking about. That's the best place to find those things. And my email address, because they don't see it on the screen, I'm going to spell it out for you. I know you know about Aton. It's like a ton of bricks, but it's plural. ATONS DNA at gmail.com. That's Aton's DNA at gmail.com. All right. Like ton with an S on it and genetic material DNA.
Okay,
Um,
well, thank you, brother, for that. I prefer to see it not as a ton of bricks, but a ton, the aspect of the creator that Akhenaten and his family
mhm,
embraced,
mhm.
where they were surrounded by the loving hands of the creator. So listen, thank you so much, brother. It's a pleasure having you on the show, and you will be one of the guests that I'll have back on the regular to share groundbreaking information with the community that's in dire need of it. So thank you so much for being a guest on this edition of the Browder File Show. I want to thank our listeners for tuning in, and we will continue to bring you some mind-freeing information from some mind-freeing guests in the coming months. Tune in. We've got some good news to share with you. This is Tony Browder with this edition of the Browder File Show. And as always, we close out talking about the power of love, the need for us to love ourselves. My guest mentioned John Lewis. This is the weekend of the annual Bridge Crossing Jubilee in Selma, Alabama. So hats off to Sister Fire Rose and her husband, Hank Sanders, who've been the organizer of this event for over 2 decades. There's going to be a lot of conversation happening this weekend about the state of the nation and the state of the world. We encourage you to not only be involved in these conversations, but to have meaningful conversations based on actual knowledge. So thank you so much for tuning in to the Browder File. Mrs. Nouveau, get well, get out of the hospital. We're all praying for you. And as Maurice White says, we leave you in love, and the greatest love is inside of you. And if nothing else, learn to love yourself and unearth all the beautiful things inside of you. This is Tony Browder. See you next week. Take us on out of here, my brother. Peace.
Alert all the beautiful things around.